session of this series. Just okay. Oh, somebody else. No, me. So I'd like to begin this evening's session. Please join me in Gassho. Namo Amidabutsu. Namo Amidabutsu. So last week we started off by looking at the Tanisho in accordance with the 5 tenets of Jodo Shinshu. And we started off by looking at this primal vow and how what we call the other power of Amida Buddha. And so I wanted to just continue on with that, and I'm just going to share the screen. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah.
Let me just. Okay. So, of course, what I'm sharing with you on the screen is the chapter 1 of the Tanisho, and it's just loaded with information. As you know, the Tanisho was written by the disciple of Shinran Shonin. His name was Yu Yenbo, and it was actually written a number of years after Shinran Shonin had passed away. And Tanisho literally means lamenting the divergence. And what this is all about was after Shinran Shonin passed away, there was some discrepancies of understanding the Nembutsu teachings amongst his followers, particularly some of the followers in the Kanto area, the eastern part of Japan. And so they would have their own interpretations, if you will. And in fact, there were some new schools of Buddhism or Jodo Shinshu, splinter groups of Jodo Shinshu that were formed through this as well. Right now in Japan, they call it Shinshu Jippa, which means the 10 schools of Jodo Shinshu. And the two major ones, the two largest ones, are what we call the Nishi Honganji and the Higashi Honganji, the east and the west Honganji temples. But there are 8 other smaller temples that were founded by disciples of Shinran or offshoots from the teachings. And some of these have little discrepancy in how they understand the teachings. But so Yu Yenbo wrote this Tanisho as he was saying, the ones that we recognize today, their teachings are all relatively similar, but there were others that were completely out of kilt, if you will, with the teaching. So Yu Yenbo, sorry about this. Did I forget to? Oh, no. Okay, good. Oh, wait. No.
あ、どうなった？音が出てない。
Did I? Sorry for a second here. Just wanted to make sure. Oh. Oh, no, okay, yeah, I've got it. Okay. Yeah, so Yu Yenbo wrote this, and this Tanisho is made up of basically 2 parts. The first half, which is 10 chapters, we call them chapters, but they're very short, is of course seen to be the words of Shinran Shonin. They were discussions that Yu Yenbo had with Shinran, and through these conversations, this is what Yu Yenbo remembers. And we do look at them as the direct words of Shinran Shonin. And of them, this chapter 1 is one of the most important pieces in Jodo Shinshu, as it sort of encapsulates what Jodo Shinshu is all about. And as I mentioned last week, we started off by looking at the primal vow because right at the very beginning it says, "Saved by the inconceivable working of Amita's vow, I shall realize birth in the Pure Land." The moment you entrust yourself thus to the vow, so that the mind set upon saying the Nembutsu arises within you, you are immediately brought to share in the benefit of being grasped by Amida, never to be abandoned. So this last part of this sentence, this being grasped by Amida, never to be abandoned, is part of what we call the vow 11 from the 48 vows, and I'll get into that in a second. Know that the primal vow of Amida makes no distinction between people young and old, good and evil. Only Shinjin is essential. For it is a vow to save the person whose karmic evil is deep and grave and whose blind passions abound. Thus, for those who entrust themselves to the primal vow, no good acts are required, because no good surpasses the Nembutsu, nor need they despair of the evil they commit, for no evil can obstruct the working of Amida's primal vow. So this is the chapter 1. And as I mentioned last week, we started looking at the teachings of Jodo Shinshu in accordance with this, and we talked about the primal vow Amida Buddha and how it comes out in what we call the larger sutra on Amida, or the larger Shikavati Vyuha Sutra. And in there, it tells the story of this Amida Buddha and how Amida Buddha started off as this bodhisattva named Bodhisattva Dhammakara, or in Hozo Bosatsu in Japanese. And so this bodhisattva decides he wants to create what we call a Buddha land for himself. And in order to do that, he is shown by what we call the Vairocana Buddha, the 53rd of the Buddhas in the history of time. And he has shown many different Buddha lands. And Bodhisattva Dhammakara decides he will take the best parts of these various many Buddha lands and create his own Buddha land. And in order to do that, he proclaims, or he makes what we call 48 vows. And these 48 vows are referred to in different ways. Shantao, the Zendo Daishi, the fifth of the 7 patriarchs, called the whole thing a primal vow. And even Shinran uses primal or universal vow for a number of these vows within the 48. And so we have to understand then, first of all, why would the historical Buddha expound on teachings on Amida Buddha? And I explained last week that at the beginning of the larger sutra, it's talking about Ananda, the Buddha's cousin, looks upon the Buddha. He's got an aura about him, five specific differences of Amida Buddha from his usual look. And when the Buddha asked him, had somebody urged you to notice this? And Ananda said, no, I just happened to notice this aura about you. Then Shakyamuni praises him, saying that you have, you're in the right state of mind. You're in a specific samadhi to hear this teaching. And then he goes on to tell about Amida Buddha. But the whole idea of this Amida Buddha is considered to be what we call upaya, or upaya in English is compassionate means. And what the Buddha did was he often told analogies or stories as ways to expound the Dharma, the teaching. A very famous one of this is seen in the Lotus Sutra. It's said that the Buddha tells about this very rich individual who has young children, and this rich merchant goes away. But as he goes away from the house, he notices that the front of the house is on fire, and the kids are playing in the back of the house, in one of the back rooms, and they don't notice that the house is ablaze. And so the merchant goes around back, and first of all, he tells them, oh, I've got this cart, beautiful cart that's pulled by a donkey, and then he tells them, "Uh, I've got this cart that's pulled by a deer." And the third time he tells them, I've got this cart that's pulled by a horse. And so when the children see these three different carts, they come running out of the house uh, to, I guess, receive their carts full of goodies. And when they do come out, in fact, he gives them not those three carts, but one cart, which is one that's an ox that's very finely decorated and very more elaborate than any of the other three carts. So this is a parable that's told, a very famous parable. And what this is telling about is that um, the children are in the thralls of uh, life. It's a analogy of life itself, and even though we're in this burning house, we don't realize it, and we're just caught up in our uh, immediate pleasures. And so it's only when they're shown something that's better than what they have immediately that they come out. And the reason why this comes out in the Lotus Sutra, it says that the Lotus Sutra, in this analogy, that the Lotus Sutra is the supreme teaching, and so the oxen cart, the three carts before are showing different paths of Buddhism, but the ox one is supposed to be the Lotus Sutra, and that's the supreme one according to this. But anyways, this is a very famous, what we call example of upaya, using compassionate means to share the Dharma. And so, in line with this, the historical Buddha, out of great compassion for all sentient beings, had to tell the story of Amida Buddha. And the reason being is that this path is a path that is truly accessible for all beings. And I'll get to that in just a second. But um, as I've explained before, it's very similar to what I guess, to Windows and even Macintosh computers, Mac computers. Prior to them, computers were very, very not user friendly. You had to have a lot of knowledge in order to use a computer. You had to learn these different languages, and then well, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they created a system where it made it very user friendly, and where the user only has to press a on off button and this thing pops up, right? So in a similar sense, the more user friendly it is, the more broad the uh, catch basement is. And so similarly, for in Buddhism, this teachings on Amida, because Amida does the work, it has a much broader catch base. It's not asking the follower, the practitioner to do all these different practices, right? So we can understand from the perspective of the historical Buddha that this is why he needed to expound this teaching so that all beings could attain enlightenment. And Shinran Shonin points this out. So in one of his writings, it's known as the Notes on the Essentials of Faith Alone, Shinran clearly outlines how Amida Buddha comes to being. And he says nirvana has innumerable names. It is impossible to give them in detail. I will list only a few. And he talks about the different names associated with nirvana. Nirvana is called extinction of passions, the uncreated, peaceful happiness, eternal bliss, true reality, Dharma body, Dharma nature, suchness, oneness, and Buddha nature. So these are all different ways of describing nirvana. Okay? Buddha nature is none other than Tathagata. This Tathagata pervades the countless worlds. It fills the hearts and minds of the ocean of all beings. Thus, plants, trees, and land all attain Buddhahood. So Tathagata means thus come. And it's talking about how the Dharma comes and is everywhere. It fills plants, trees, and land. They all have Buddha nature and become Buddhahood. Then he continues on this passage, and this is where I highlighted it. Since it is with this heart and mind of all sentient beings that they entrust themselves to the vow of the Dharma body as compassionate means, this Shinjin is none other than Buddha nature. This Buddha nature is Dharma nature. Dharma nature is Dharma body. For this reason, there are two kinds of Dharma body with regard to the Buddha. The first is called Dharma body as suchness, and the second, Dharma body as compassionate means. Dharma body as suchness has neither color nor form. Thus, the mind cannot grasp it, nor words describe it. From this oneness was manifested form, called Dharma body as compassionate means. Taking this form, the Buddha announced the name Bhiksu Dharmakara. So this is that Bodhisattva Dharmakara, or Hozo Bosatsu in Japanese, and established the 48 great vows that surpass conceptual understanding. Among these vows are the primal vow of immeasurable light, which is vow 12, and the universal vow of immeasurable life, which is vow 13. And to the form manifesting these two vows, Bodhisattva Vasubandhu is the second of the seven patriarchs, gave the title Tathagata of unhindered light filling the 10 quarters. This Tathagata has fulfilled the vows which are the cause of that Buddhahood, and thus is called Tathagata of the fulfilled body. This is none other than Amida Tathagata. So this is Shinran Shonin explaining about this. And he's saying that in the Dharma body, we have two kinds of Dharma bodies. And in Sanskrit, we call this Dharmakaya. So Dharmakaya, Dharma body, Kaya's body. Dharma body has no shape, no form, as is said in this paragraph here. Dharma body as suchness has neither color nor form. Thus the mind cannot grasp it, nor words describe it. So that's one body, the Dharma body of suchness. That is the ultimate truth or reality that transcends our conceptualization. Yet it's everywhere, all around us. So I like to use that analogy of the Matrix from that movie, The Matrix. If you haven't seen The Matrix, you might want to see it. There's a lot of people that say it resonates with Buddhism, the Matrix, because it talks about this nebulous that's all around us, and in a sense, this Dharmakaya is all around us. We can't see it, we can't conceptualize it, but it is reality, truth, reality that's all around the universe. And but from this, we get the Dharma body as compassionate means. So this is a very important idea in Buddhism, is that the truth has to express itself. I mentioned before how Buddhism talks about wisdom and compassion going hand in hand, right? And so wisdom only becomes wisdom when it is shared with others. And that sharing with others is out of compassion. Okay? So truth itself has to manifest itself. It can't just remain this nebulous, this thing that we can't conceptualize. It has to express itself. And that's what we call compassionate means. And in order to express itself, it takes on many different forms. And one of the forms that it expresses itself as is this Bhiksu Dharmakara, who establishes 48 vows. It gives it a whole tangible, something that we can grasp, an idea that we could see or feel. And this is why in this Tanisho, the first chapter of Tanisho, when it says the primal vow of Amida makes no distinction between people young and old, good and evil, only Shinjin is essential. So here it just says young and old, good and evil, but it also, if you expand it, it could be often you'll see things like the ignorant versus the wise. It doesn't discriminate between any of that because this vow is the compassionate, or this Buddha is the compassionate expression of the Dharma, and it encapsulates all sentient beings, all beings. And so, in this description of this compassionate body, there are certain terms that are used, and the primal vow of immeasurable light. And if you, I wrote down some important vows from the 48 vows, and the 12th one says, if when I attain Buddhahood, my light should be limited, unable to illuminate at least 100,000 kodis of Nayutas or Buddha lands, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. And the following one, 13, says, if when I attain Buddhahood, my lifespan should be limited, even to the extent of 100,000 kodis of Nayutas of Kalpas, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So these are measurement of time and space. So Nayutas is an infinite different ways of describing numbers, but 100,000 kodis of Nayutas of Buddha lands shows the spatial direction, that it encompasses all space, and also the next one about the time. So these two, Shinran says, are the primal vow of immeasurable light and the universal vow of immeasurable life. And that's why Vasubandhu, the second of the seven patriarchs, titled it Tathagata of unhindered light filling the 10 quarters. So this light fills the whole universe. This Tathagata has fulfilled the vows which are the cause of that Buddhahood, and thus is called Tathagata of the fulfilled body. This is none other than Amida Tathagata. So here again, we see that the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, had to talk about Amida Buddha, because it is a form, compassionate body of Dharma body as compassionate means. So this is a natural expression for Shakyamuni Buddha to expound about this particular Amida Buddha. And Shinran also in his Kyogyo Shinsho, which was his work, the true teaching, practice, and attainment of the Pure Land Way, even though the title doesn't include it, of course, in this piece, there's a chapter that we call a chapter on Shinjin, or chapter on faith, which is a third chapter. So the title itself is The True Teaching, Practice, and Attainment of the Pure Land Way. Okay, which is using the traditional Buddhist path to enlightenment. Is you need the teaching, you need a practice that follows that teaching, and through that practice you attain enlightenment. Okay, that's the traditional way of understanding the Buddhist path to enlightenment. However, for Shinran Shonin, this idea of shinjin, or entrusting heart, or sometimes translated as faith, becomes a very important aspect of it. And so he actually includes a separate chapter just on shinjin, or faith. Now, most people, or prior to Shinran, usually that faith was sort of included with practice. So in order to practice something, you have to have faith in it, or you have to entrust to it to truly follow a practice. But Shinran clearly sets this as two things, although he bridges them together. He says they are, in fact, one and together. And so at the end of his chapter on practice, he writes that song called the Shoshinge, the hymn of true Nembutsu and Shinjin and Nembutsu. And before he writes that song, and we went through that last year, all the details of that Shoshinge, the hymn. But before he gets into that hymn, he has this preface to it, and he says to introduce it. Generally stated, with regard to the vows, there is true and real practice and shinjin. So right here, he says true and real practice and shinjin. And there is practice and shinjin that are provisional means. The vow on which the true and real practice is based is a vow that all Buddhas say the name. The vow, which is the 17th vow, and the vow on which true and real shinjin is based is the vow of sincere mind and trust, and that's the 18th vow. These are the practice and shinjin of the selected primal vow. Its practicers are all the good and the evil, the sages of the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and the foolish. Their birth is birth that is inconceivable. The Buddha and land are fulfilled Buddha and fulfilled land. All of this is none other than the ocean of true reality or suchness, the inconceivable vow. This is the central purport of the largest sutra of the Buddha of immeasurable life, the genuine significance of the true essence of other power. So before he goes into the Shoshinge, Shinran says that there's true practice and true what we call shinjin, or entrusting heart. And he says these are defined in the 17th and 18th vow. So the true practice, which was designated by Amida Buddha, is said to be, if when I attain Buddhahood, innumerable Buddhas in the lands of the 10 directions should not all praise and glorify my name, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. So basically it's saying that all beings, the name Namo Amida Butsu will be heard everywhere, and that is the practice, is to praise or recite that name. Okay, that's what the 17th vow says. And unless that practice is fulfilled, then he would not become Amida Buddha. And then the 18th vow, and this is what we traditionally call the primal vow, or Honggang, says, if when I attain Buddhahood, sentient beings in the lands of the 10 directions who sincerely and joyfully entrust themselves to me, desire to be born in my land and call my name even 10 times, should not be born there, then may I not attain perfect enlightenment. Excluded, however, are those who commit the 5 gravest offenses and abuse the right dharma. Okay? So this is known as the 18th vow. And in the 18th vow, we have what we call the three minds or 3 hearts. Okay, one is a sincere heart. So it says here, directions, sentient beings in the lands of the 10 directions who sincerely, so it says sincerely, that's a sincere mind or heart, and entrust themselves, so entrusting heart or mind. And finally, the heart or mind to desire to be born into Amida Buddha's Pure Land. So up until Shinran Shonin's time, these 3 hearts or minds were deemed to be something that the sentient being, the practicer, had to cultivate. So you had to have a sincere mind, an entrusting mind, and the desire to be born in the Pure Land. Okay? So that was part of the minds of the individuals. However, for Shinran, he said that we actually, well, for him, actually, for he himself didn't have this sincere mind. He lacked that sincere mind. And he realized that this sincere mind is actually the mind of Amida Buddha. And we find that Shinran Shonin was, in fact, a great scholar, if you will, in that he read many, many different sutras, and he compared the many different sutras. And through that comparison, he was able to find the deeper meaning of what the Buddha was trying to get at. So he was able to go beyond just what the words said on the surface. And he expresses this in this chapter on Shinjin, or chapter on faith. When at the very beginning of it, Shinran says, reverently contemplating Amida's directing of virtue for our going forth, I find there is great Shinjin. Great Shinjin is the superlative means for attaining longevity and deathlessness. It is the wondrous way to awaken aspiration for the pure and rejection of the defiled. It is a straightforward mind directed to us through the selected vow. It is Shinjin that actualizes Amida's profound and vast benefiting of others. It is true mind that is diamond-like and indestructible. It is pure Shinjin by which a person easily reaches a pure land where no one goes. It is the mind that is single, realized by a person who is grasped and protected by the compassionate light. It is great Shinjin, rare and unsurpassed. It is a quick path, difficult for people to accept. It is a true cause of attaining great nirvana. It is the white path by which all virtues are fulfilled instantly. It is the ocean of Shinjin that is itself suchness or true reality. So he's going on repeatedly to explain how glorious this entrusting heart, or Shinjin, is. And he goes on to explain why this is so. The mind arises from the vow of birth through the Nembutsu. This great vow is known as the selected primal vow, the vow of the threefold mind of the primal vow, the vow of sincere mind and entrusting, and further may be called the vow of Shinjin, which is Amida's directing of virtue for our going forth. For the foolish and ignorant who are ever sinking in birth and death, the multitudes turning into transmigration, it is not attainment of the unexcelled, incomparable fruit of enlightenment that is difficult. The genuine difficulty is realizing true and real Shinjin. Why? Because this realization takes place through the Tathagata supportive power, because it comes about wholly through the power of great compassion and all-embracing wisdom. If pure Shinjin should be realized, that mind will not be inverted. That mind will not be vain or false. Thereupon, that sentient being of extreme evil, profound and immense, will realize the mind of great joy and receive the veneration and love of all the sacred honored ones. So here he's saying, of course, this Shinjin, or this entrusting heart, he realizes is not something we cultivate, but is in fact through the merits of Amida Buddha. And he expresses this in the following passage when he says, and here, this is where he takes several different sutras or scriptures, and he puts them together, or he finds the commonality in it. So with this larger sutra on Amida Buddha, it said that there were 12 translations in all in China. So it was translated 12 times, of which there are still 5 of them that are remaining. 7 of them have disappeared over the centuries, but there are 5 versions of it that remain. And so he takes a couple of these versions, and they have very similar but slightly different lines in them. And Shinran sort of amalgamates them to see what the true meaning is behind it. So he says, the passage stating the primal vow of sincere mind and trusting in the larger sutra. So this is the 18th vow, right? If when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters with sincere mind entrusting themselves aspire to be born in my land and saying my name perhaps even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain supreme enlightenment. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right dharma. So this is the 18th vow as we traditionally see it in our teachings or writings. But there's another version of this, which is the Sutra of the Tathagata of Measurable Life, states, if when I have realized the supreme enlightenment, living beings in other Buddha lands should hear my name. Okay, so this next sentence here, this is a very important point. It says here, I will with sincere mind direct all my roots of good to them. So this is the Bodhisattva Dharmakara, the compassionate body, before becoming Amida Buddha, making these 48 vows. So the first one that we saw was the one that we traditionally see. And the second one is very similar, but there's a slight difference in nuance. Okay, so in the first, it says the sentient beings of the 10 quarters with sincere mind entrusting themselves. Okay, whereas the second one says, I will with sincere mind direct all my roots of good to them. So this is the Amida Buddha talking here, right? The first one says the sentient beings will have the sincere mind, but the second one here says Amida Buddha has a sincere mind, which he directs to the sentient beings. So there's a very, very slight difference in nuance here, but Shinran picks up on the differences in the nuance. And he says this particular point of saying that I will, with sincere mind, direct all my roots of good to them, is showing that in this 18th vow, the sincere mind is in fact the mind of Amida Buddha. not the sentient being, but the mind of Amida Buddha. And he expresses this in the passage declaring the fulfillment of the primal vow. In the larger sutra, it says, all sentient beings, as they hear the name, realize even one thought moment of shinji and joy, which is directed to them from Amida. So this part here, which is directed to them from Amida's sincere mind, okay? This is very unique in how one reads this passage. It was unique to Shinran Shoni, and he gets this from this Sutra of Tathagata of Immeasurable Life, where it says, I will with sincere mind direct all my roots of good to them, right? So this is Amida Buddha saying, I will with my sincere mind. So in the same way, Shinran reads this fulfillment passage. He says, all sentient beings, as they hear the name, realize even one thought moment of shinjin and joy, which is directed to them from Amida's sincere mind. So this shinjin, or interesting heart, or awakening, comes from the working of Amida Buddha. Okay. So this was different from what the masters before had, how they understood it. So Shinran basically said it's all the working of Amida Buddha, and through that working, it cultivates interesting heart within me. So again, it's that working of Amida from infinite past that is working on me to awaken to reality. And when we look at this, this is not that different from when the Buddha attained enlightenment. Okay, when we traditionally talk about the Buddha attaining enlightenment, uh, we'll use terms such as awakened one, right? Or yeah, basically awakened one. Shakyamuni means the awakened one, enlightened one. Buddha means awakened one, right? So it's not something that the historical Buddha created, but he awoke to the true reality. And similarly, this Shinjin is not something that we create, but we awaken to the mind of Amida. We awaken to the oneness of the universe. And so when we awaken to that, there's great joy that comes from that awakening. Realizing, on one hand, my very finite self, yet at the same time realizing that I am embraced in the infinite. And that's what it says here, right? The Sutra of the Tathagata of Immeasurable Life, when upon hearing the name of the Tathagata of Immeasurable Life, sentient beings of the Buddha lands of other quarters awaken one thought moment of pure Shinjin, rejoice, and cherishing Amida's directing of his roots of good to them, aspire to be born in the land of immeasurable life. So here, it says right here, awaken one thought moment of pure Shinjin, right? Clearly says right there that it's something that we awaken to. So it's not something that we cultivate or create by ourselves, but it's the mind or the true reality that we awaken to. And Shinran points this out clearly in this passage. So, and then at that point, we attain what we call the state of non-retrogression, ultimately attaining the perfect enlightenment. So again, Shinran Shoni's ability to read these sutras, the different ones, and look at their nuances and bring them together to find the true or the deeper meaning, sort of reading between the lines almost, was separated him from many of the other previous teachers, and he was able to show how our enlightenment or being born in the Pure Land is not based on our merit or our doing, but is in fact it's the working of the infinite upon us that we awaken to, and when we do, then we have we receive this awakening or entrusting heart. Okay. um, were you able to follow me at all? I don't know if you were able to follow or not, but any questions or comments? And I apologize. I should have sent the material way before to you guys. Completely slipped my mind to send the material to you.
Sensei,
Yes,
Michael,
yes,
I was
Michael.
curious. They were talking about the body as suchness is the Dharmakaya, and the body of compassionate means. Would that be Sambhogakaya?
Yes, exactly, exactly
Uh,
right.
Okay, so then that would be that Amida is a Sambhogakaya Buddha.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
And then there's a third body, which we call Nirmanakaya. And Nirmanakaya is the historical Buddha,
Buddha.
Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay.
Thank
So,
you.
but as Shinan points out, that um, this body of compassionate means um, the Dharma body of suchness has to express itself. It's it's, as I mentioned, the wisdom and compassion going hand in hand, right? You can't have one without the other. And so it's like the flip side of a coin. So where there is Dharmakaya, there will be some expression of that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I also wondered, sometimes in my mind, I come up with the idea that Sambhogakaya, or Amida Buddha being a Sambhogakaya Buddha, is kind of like a hologram. Like it's not a physical body, but
Hmm.
it's expressing something that you wouldn't be able to see. So you have some concept of that which is unknown.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I'm not exactly sure how holograms work, but that's an interesting analogy. But there are many, many. So some Bogakaya, this fulfilled body. Um, I mean, in a strict sense, usually there's very how can I say? They're given guidelines as to what is a Sambhogakaya. But I think if you want to look at it in a different light, it can be um, expressions in the universe that try to awaken us. So, in fact, Shinran, at the very beginning of his Kyogyo Shinsho, the true teaching, practice, and attainment of Pure Land Way, in the very, very beginning of it has a preface. And he says that when the cause and conditions came about, he said, he specifically names Vaidehi, Ajatasattu, and Devadatta, who are traditionally considered evil beings. And Shina said he calls them incarnated ones. That these incarnated ones came into this world to guide us to Amida's teachings. Okay? So through all that the tragedy at Rajagriha, that was all there to help us, to guide us to Amida Buddha. So Shinran is able to see them in a sense, almost like a Sambhoga Kaya. They're expressions of the truth. And in fact, everything is an expression of the truth. A lot of it has to do with how we perceive things. 50% of a conversation is the listener as well, right? So depending on the listener, um, I could give this talk to all of you, and every single one of you has a different perspective of it, because you're not hearing the exact same thing as the person next to you, or seeing the exact same thing as the person next to you. And so, and a lot of that has to do with our previous experiences as well, that we come into this, right? So because you had all been following some of the earlier sessions, even if you didn't understand it completely, you have an idea of what I'm talking about. But a person that came in for the very first time, say today, they're thinking, oh, he's talking Greek, right? And think about it. When you first started out these sessions, you probably would have had no idea what I was talking about when I went through all this, right? But now, at least, even if you don't understand it completely, you have an inkling of, oh, at least I know sort of what he's talking about. And that's because of your past experiences, right? So as we experience life, there are many, many expressions of the truth that come about. And I think with Buddhism, it's that journey that's just as important as the goal. It's a path. That's why Buddhism, we talk about paths. We don't say goals. Uh, and in fact, martial arts is the same way. Uh, and in fact, not just even martial arts, the cultural arts in Japan, they often call them paths. Okay, so you have kado, which is a path of flowers, sado, which is the path of tea, right? Um, shodo, which is a path of calligraphy. Um, these are all called paths because there's not an end. There's not a perfection. In fact, when I went to study in Japan, um, one of the places I studied at was this Buddhist seminary school, and as part of our activities, so this Buddhist seminary school is very interesting, because it was it was very practical on how to become a minister or a monk. Okay, so not only did they teach us scholastic lessons, but we also had classes in flower arrangement, for instance, because as a minister at a temple, that's something we have to commonly do, is flower arrangement, right? And also we had classes in calligraphy. And let me tell you, so in Japan, when you're a child, if you're left-handed, uh, more so before than today, but they would often try to correct you to become right-handed. And one of the major reasons for correcting you to become right-handed is because when you do calligraphy, calligraphy is really for right-handed people. Okay, and I'm a left-handed person, and my mother. I was the fourth child, right? And we were here in Canada, and so my mother, whether she was too tired from having 3 kids before or whatever it was, she never bothered correcting or trying to make me right-handed, right? So I'm left-handed through and through. So when I went to Japan, taking calligraphy for the first time, it's very, very different because so when you're using a brush, okay, the whole idea of the brush is the stroke is you're pulling it with your right hand. Okay, but with your left hand, you end up pushing it. Okay, so the where you're putting your inflections or it's completely different. So it's very difficult for left-handers to do calligraphy. But I always remember the calligraphy teacher was he said we start off by learning ichi, which is one. Okay, and one is just one stroke sideways. Okay, one, the number one. But he says we start off with ichi, but it is the hardest character to master. He said, and I could never understand that at first. you would think one stroke going across would be the most easiest thing. But for him, it's a path, you see. It's not, if he's able to write that ichi or that one stroke perfectly, that's probably when he's attained enlightenment of calligraphy, right? For him, his understanding of calligraphy is so deep that that's the most difficult character, is that one stroke. So you start off with it, but it's also the most difficult one to master. So in Asia, this idea of path being very important, the journey is very important. It's not necessarily goal driven. That that's not the idea. It's every step on that path is the beginning of a new journey. So every step every time we sit down and talk or whatever, that's a new beginning as well. Okay, so path is very important. So now how did I get on this? I can't even remember now. Anyways, the learning, the experience is very important for us. Okay.
Thank you, Sensei.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Or Karen, you
Sensei.
always have something to say.
Yes, I was just wondering, when you were quoting or reading, closer to the beginning, there was a phrase that said, "The Pure Land where nobody goes."
Oh yes.
Does that mean the Pure Land doesn't exist as a physical entity, but is more like a concept, so it should be like pure space, not pure land? And yet they're talking about going to this what did they say?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, and there are, I think, number of ways to understand it. And first of all, I would say I'm not one that don't take my words as gospel or anything like that. It's only one understanding as well, because there are, it's this whole thing of Amida Buddha. How do we understand this? Is there an actual physical place that we go to? As I mentioned, I was doing a workshop in Seattle and saying that how Amida's Pure Land is to the west. So one person perked out, well, that must be Hawaii, right? So whether we take it literally or figuratively, this idea of Pure Land where no one goes to, I've heard explanations also that, so there is a vow called the 22nd vow, which states that those who go to the Pure Land return back to this world, now working to liberate those still in ignorance. So the explanations I've heard are that it says no one goes there because it's not sort of like a paradise where you go and relax. Okay, so once we become a Buddha, then we have to be, as I mentioned earlier, that Dharma body of suchness has to become Dharma body of compassionate means. So we also become Dharma body of compassionate means to work together with all those who've gone before us to liberate those who are still in ignorance like us. So that's why it's not like a paradise where that's why it's not a goal driven, like as I mentioned, this path. So the path continues on, right? So that was one explanation that I've heard. when it says no one goes there, it's because when you become a Buddha, you're no longer sitting idle. Yeah, you're not there going, this is, when we go in Japan, when we go into the onsen spas, the hot spas, the common terminology we say, gokuraku, gokuraku, this is paradise, and we relax. But in fact, when you become a Buddha, it's not like that. You have to become, you have to start reaching out to others, basically. Yeah.
So it's interesting that it seems like these teachings, these concepts are highly, highly intellectual, really. They're of the mind. And yet the person has to, if they truly embrace these concepts, these intellectual ideas, then it becomes manifest in physical activity, like the compassionate means. So it's really, really, really interesting to see almost like thoughts manifest into action. It's it's just, it blows my mind sense.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. That's a very, very interesting point. But yeah, I think so. You made a very, very, very interesting point. Thank you, Karen. Any other questions or comments? Anybody? Don't be shy. Yes, Naomi.
So yeah, I agree. It seems to end up sounding very intellectual, but I have a feeling that actually it isn't. Like, so that's where the mind becomes a trap because we make it into an intellectual process. But that's just my take on it.
No, so when I was in Japan, I had the good fortune of going to two different types of schools. One was a seminary school, which is more practical, and the other one was the postgraduate at the university. And what I found, the major difference between the two of them, was the seminary school was more based on experience and faith, and the scholastic, the university was more scholastic, and they were both good, but I think from a religious perspective, I gained a lot more from the seminary school. And in fact, every morning at the seminary school, we would start off with a morning service that was conducted by the students. So we would be broken up into groups, and every day a different group would lead the morning service, and you would get certain responsibilities within that service. So a simple example is ringing the Kansho bell at the very beginning of the service. That was one responsibility. So when your turn was coming up, for from the week before, you would start practicing how to hit that bell properly, right? So, anyways, we had all these different things, but where we had the morning service, it's sort of like a hondo, but in the very entrance of that hondo, at the top, there was a passage. In Japanese, it says "Gakubutsu Daijihi," "Gakubutsu Daijihi," which means to study Buddhism is to study the compassionate heart of the Buddha. Okay, so it's not just a scholastic endeavor that we're doing, but it's trying to receive that compassionate heart of the Buddha. So when we listen, if we listen with that mindset, um, it makes it a little easier, or yeah, it can be very, very, yeah, you can get in the trap of being very scholastical or mind blowing. Yet at the same time, when I was at the university, I had this one professor. He was such an interesting professor. He would go, he would start off the class, and you know he was using a blackboard at the time, and you know at the beginning of class, the blackboard will be clean of nothing on there. By the end of each class, it will be just filled with his writing and scribbling and whatnot, and none of us could follow him because he was so far out there. But at the same time, you could sense his sincerity, or his, he was writing all this furiously because of a great passion that he had, and you could sense that in the way he taught. So even when you do it from a scholastic perspective, you can be scholastic, but also with great passion and joy behind it. And so yeah, learning the compassionate heart of the Buddha is, I think, one thing that we're trying to do when we have these sessions.
It's like that fellow who had to just sweep every single day and became enlightened, right, Sensei?
Yes, yes, yes. We have to sweep. I have to sweep. I'm not a good curler though.
No, the fellow who swept the garden.
No, I know. But when you said sweep, I was thinking curling. So I'm kidding. Okay. So thanks everyone, and see you next week. Okay.
Arigato, Sensei. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Sensei.
Everybody,
Sensei.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, y'all.
Night.
Bye.